Welcome back to Leaders, a podcast dedicated to exploring the best leaders this world has ever seen. On today's episode 7, we'll cover the famed Jeff Bezos of Amazon fame. And as we go into further episodes within Leaders, it's clear we're studying both leaders past and present. Some very well known, as Jeff is, while others are not very well known. A few of the other names that we've already covered, I feel like people of this day and age probably haven't heard of. But I think that the commonality between all of them is being able to connect the dots between their leadership styles. And as we'll see here with Jeff, there's many parallels, and within his mentors and heroes, there are those that we've already covered that fit into that mold, which is interesting. And as we cover this, and as I've reflected on the first 6 episodes, one thing I think to keep in mind as I try to help connect those dots is to map out and outline a more succinct summary of each respective person's leadership profile. And so through a visual, I will try to start creating those as the episodes go along, including each person's background as well as their leadership style, maybe a few words that describe them, and then some quotes, so that is a good kind of indexing of the wealth of information that each episode covers, is to also kind of succinctly summarize that episode with the focus on their leadership style and leadership profile. So more to come with that, but let's get into Jeff Bezos. And in order to cover him, a handful of resources within this will be books from Amazon Unbound, as well as working backwards. There are some interviews of Jeff and some clips on YouTube, so on and so forth, that were also utilized. He's done commencement speeches. He's done in-person interviews for conferences, some podcast interviews here and there. And so a lot of what is reflected not only in his actions from the leadership style, but through shareholder letters, these interviews, as well as the books, of which the author Brad Stone has really covered in depth the path of Amazon as well as the path of Jeff and his leadership journey. And as we get in that leadership journey and his rise to the CEO path, so Jeff, obviously, as most people know, is the founder and former CEO of Amazon, one of the world's largest companies, and he started it in 1994, originally as an online bookstore. It's obviously grown since to sell a wide variety of products and services. And he stepped down as CEO in 2021, but he still remains the company's executive chairman. And he was born in Albuquerque, New Mexico in 1964. He later attended Princeton University, where he studied both electrical engineering and computer science. After graduating, he worked as a financial analyst, and in 1990, he joined renowned hedge fund D.E. Shaw, where he worked as a senior vice president there. And in 1984, he read an article about the growth of the internet. And in this case, the internet and the growth there was something of the magnitude of like 2,400% in terms of its growth. And so he realized that it had the potential to revolutionize the way people shop and interact, and he decided to start that online bookstore as a result. And so he quit his job at D.E. Shaw, and he moved to Seattle, Washington, where he founded Amazon. And now Amazon quickly started as a small operation, but it quickly grew. In 1997, the company went public, became an instant success. He used the company's profits to expand their product offerings, invest in new technologies. They launched AWS and provide cloud services to businesses of all sizes. He's been praised for his business acumen and his willingness to take risks. A little bit criticized for his aggressive business practices and him being in the limelight as well between his relationships and high-profile divorce. His wife, Mackenzie Scott, and her wealth have been in the news continuously as she gives back to a lot of different organizations over the last few years. And anyway, there's no doubt that he's one of the most successful entrepreneurs of our time. Amazon is ubiquitous in this world, and it's grown into a global powerhouse. And he's really changed the way people shop. And this company, I think, in line with Apple, has just changed the way that each person goes about their daily life. And so let's get into his mantras, philosophies, some quotes, and the key characteristics of his leadership style. The first thing to think of is that Jeff thinks that the number one job of leaders is that they are hired to make a small amount of high-quality decisions. And a lot of what he applies into a lot of his business decisions at Amazon was what he calls a regret minimization framework. And he thought the biggest example of this being that, back to the internet example, is participating in the internet was too big of an opportunity and he would deeply regret not pursuing it. So most major decisions that he comes across, he applies this kind of way of minimizing the regret as to, if I don't do this, am I going to deeply regret it? So a great kind of just question to ask yourself. And he has asked himself throughout his career that has been successful. And as we draw parallels to past leaders that we've covered on this episode in its early stages, this being episode 7, but episode 1, we honed in on Jim Senegal of Costco fame. And I think what is underrated or downplayed is the influence that Jim had on Jeff, and where Amazon's future was really taken as a result of Jim meeting with Jeff. And what Jim described and shared openly within Jeff's questions and meetings was that Costco was really all about customer loyalty, and he helped explain the business model that Costco was running. And really, Jeff took a lot of that to heart and consequently changed the pricing strategy the day after his meeting with Jim, that being reduced 20 to 30% in terms of their prices. And in the world of retail, which is important, retailers, they are said to have to work to charge more or less. And so in Jeff, knowing that Jim has had success in Costco, he chose to work to charge less to customers and really thought that value trumps anything. And in that retail industry as well, there are no annuities in retail. And so this key meeting and this relationship really shaped the form of the Amazon Prime model, the flywheel of Amazon, their entire business model, as well as just that influence to charge less in prices really helped them to scale up the business. So that again is underrated and a great interaction between the two leaders that we've covered. In addition to Jim, Steve Jobs is another person that episode 2 that we covered is another person that Jeff has similarities to as well. And so this is more maybe from a personality standpoint and actions. So the self-reliance, resourcefulness, and efficiency draw parallels to Steve Jobs as well as kind of the brisk and direct demeanor that Steve and Jeff both exemplified from a business sense. So you see the swift decision making, the tough kind of interactions and conviction that each of them have in terms of where they need the business to go. And if there are people or decisions that are hindering that, they are going to speak up and really show that they have the vision and direction that is clear and that they need certain things to work the way that they want in order for that to happen. And so there's that. As we cycle through these episodes too, episode 3 with Jack Welch also draws some commonalities out in Jeff as well. And that comes along from a team and management structure that Jeff decides to employ as well. And so Jeff in Amazon at times can cut middle management, and ultimately he wanted doers, not managers. So that really laid itself well to GE and Jack Welch. And Jeff earlier on thought that Amazon was built to be a company of tiny startups. And what he meant by that is more of what he called two pizza teams. So a team no more than roughly 10 to 12 people that really had a natural human coordination without a lot of structure. So it was that kind of magic number that he felt that those smaller teams could really drive products and business forward. So Amazon really adopted that for a while. In addition to that, with Jack Welch's principles from a business sense, they also did some stack ranking, meaning eliminating the bottom performers over time. And really, from Jeff's standpoint with Amazon, the overall level of quality was a high point of emphasis. And so the overall level of quality of the workers improves as you get rid of those bottom performers. And so naturally the A, B, and C players, flesh themselves out over time and really bringing in the best people to help execute this vision was something that Jeff leaned on and learned from Jack in regards to that too. So some great parallels there to just exemplify some similarities between Jeff and what he learned from Jim, Steve, and Jack there. And going into the book of working backwards as well, Jeff really hones in on the financial incentives behind the leadership principles. And so he also talks about this concept of separable single-threaded leadership. And this is the concept of really a management structure such that one person is able to work on one singular topic or one singular product in every single day. So again, that goes back to the autonomous teams of no more than 10 people. Most of the time, from a decision standpoint too, you're not going to have perfect information or all the 100% information. So he really relied upon people making decisions with having 70% of the info. And a quote to kind of drive this home that I think is great is to be stubborn on the vision, but flexible on the details. And so this concept of working backwards too is really trying to define out the customer experience and then work backwards until the team achieves clarity on what to build. So sometimes, the opposite way is just trying to build something and iterate off of that and then having the customer respond to that. But in this case, he's going the opposite way. And in most cases, he goes against convention with a lot of that. And one of the early CFOs of Amazon really describes Jeff as having the drive and focus to be effective and quick about his decisions, really the level of clarity and the ability to prioritize. and exemplifying also boldness and risk taking. So that is going to be exemplified more with what Jeff really hones in on, what leaders at Amazon are supposed to exemplify. And within Amazon Unbound, and within some other literature within Amazon that still lives to this day, are 14 distinct leadership principles that Jeff helped to define out what is a leader at Amazon. And so we'll just kind of go through these one by one, as well as some of Jeff's commentary along the way as to what each of those types of means in the context of Amazon. And then after these leadership principles, to really manifest and drive home these points, I think it is important to show how Jeff's leadership really formed core ideas that Amazon relied upon to have these leadership principles exemplified. And so the first one being, and this is probably the most common one that you'll hear within the Amazon ecosystem, but customer obsession. So leaders start with the customer and work backward. They work vigorously to earn and keep customer trust. Although leaders pay attention to competitors, they obsess over customers. Second one is ownership. So leaders are owners. They think long-term and don't sacrifice long-term value for short-term results. They act on behalf of the entire company, beyond just their own team. They never say, "That's not my job." Number 3 is invent and simplify. So leaders expect and require innovation and invention from their teams and always find ways to simplify. They are externally aware, look for new ideas from everywhere, and are not limited by not invented here. As we do new things, we accept that we may be misunderstood for long periods of time. So this is a common theme of inventing, experimentation. So we'll hear a little bit more from this as we go along. Number 4 is leaders are right a lot. And so Bezos says these people are often good listeners and they change their minds a lot with new data or reanalyzing a situation. They seek to disconfirm their most widely held convictions. It's a complex world, he kind of says, so having the same views and in a dynamic and evolving world usually doesn't lead to the best results. So having strong judgment, good instincts, the ability to be seeking diverse perspectives and working to disconfirm those beliefs are another key principle. 5th one is learn and be curious. So leaders are never done learning and always seek to improve themselves. They are curious about new possibilities and act to explore them. Number 6 is hire and develop the best. Leaders raise the performance bar with every hire and promotion. They recognize exceptional talent and willingly move them throughout the organization. Leaders develop leaders and take seriously their role in coaching others, working on behalf of people to invent mechanisms for development like career choice. 7th is insisting on the highest standards. So leaders have relentlessly high standards. Many people may think at times they're unreasonably high. They're continually raising the bar and driving their teams to deliver high-quality products, services, and processes, ensuring that defects do not get sent down the line and that problems are fixed so they stay fixed. 8th is thinking big. So thinking small can be viewed as a self-fulfilling prophecy. Leaders create and communicate a bold direction that inspires results. They think differently and look around corners for ways to serve customers. Number 9 is a bias for action. So speed matters in business. Many decisions and actions are reversible and do not need extensive study. We value calculated risk-taking. 10 is frugality. Accomplish more with less. Constraints breed resourcefulness, self-sufficiency, and invention. There are no extra points for growing headcount, budget size, or fixed expense. 11 is earn trust. Leaders listen attentively, speak candidly, and treat others respectfully. Vocally self-critical, even when doing so is awkward or embarrassing. Leaders do not believe their or their team's body odor smells of perfume. They benchmark themselves and their teams against the best. Number 12 is dive deep. Leaders operate at all levels, stay connected to the details, audit frequently, and are skeptical when metrics and anecdote differ. No task is beneath them. 13, have backbone, disagree, and commit. Leaders are obligated to respectfully challenge decisions when they disagree, even when doing so is uncomfortable or exhausting. Leaders have conviction and are tenacious. They do not compromise for the sake of social cohesion. Once the decision is determined, they commit wholly. And finally, deliver results. Leaders focus on the key inputs for their business and deliver them with the right quality and in a timely fashion. Despite setbacks, they rise to the occasion and never settle. So while I think 14 is a lot from a leadership principle and the number from a listing standpoint, but in just reading through a lot of those and the few succinct sentences that describe out what does that mean from a leader standpoint, these are all things that resonate from what a leader may mean, whether it be at Amazon, which this is specific for, or just any other general organization. I think a lot of these can apply blanket across many of the companies that we see in the world. So just great articulation of a vision and principles for what is expected. And to follow that up, I think it's important to instill what these leadership principles we're striving to do. So 10 core ideas about Amazon I'm going to summarize here are, number 1, being scaled economy shared. And so back to the retail examples, not only drawing again from Costco and Jim Senegal, but also Sam Walton of Walmart. And so this idea of passing the cost savings to the customers in the form of low prices is a long-term decision, and a decision that could not be calculated out over a longer time period. So this is a very kind of distinct and bold move, I would say, in terms of when making that initial decision to go at the lowest price and not charge the customer more or pass the cost on to the customer versus the alternative was an interesting decision to make because you really could not model out. You could have probably at that point the most sophisticated data scientist or advanced modeling analyst you could find, and I don't think they could really predict out what that decision would then lead to 10, 15, 20 years down the road. So again, that being a core idea that was just executed to relentless effort, I think is one of the most important ones for how they scaled. And number 2 is customer value equals shareholder value. And so customer experience is by far the most important driver of the business. And so really focusing, again, back to the customer, ultimately will lead to the shareholders being rewarded in that sense versus focusing on maybe something that's specific to what the shareholders or what that quarter may bring. Amazon is about the long term and focusing in on getting the customer experience right, and everything else will follow. Number 3 is what I just alluded to, so it's all about the long term. Number 4 is embracing failure. And as we get into our failure section, I think this is definitely evident and something that Jeff says that failure and invention are inseparable twins. So to invent, you have to experiment. A large company that's also an invention machine And Jeff always talks about this idea of having a two-way door decision. So making decisions so that sometimes they can be reversible. And going through this failure and invention cycle is also a lot of trial and error. It's experimentation. And Jeff really hones in on the size of the failure should grow as your company grows. So if you're not doing that, then they're really not needle movers. So embracing that failure is number 4. Number 5 is what he calls a dreamy business offering, which has 4 different qualities to it. And this dreamy business offering, if something offers these 4 qualities, then you relentlessly pursue it. And so first one being customers love it, can grow to a very large size, has a strong return on capital, and finally is durable in time with potential to endure for decades. Back to the leadership principles here, another core idea is to think like an owner. So success is largely affected by the ability to attract and retain a motivated employee base. 7 is more of a financial metric, but free cash flow per share. So that he defines as the ultimate financial measure and something that investors can spend. Some of these other financial metrics that might be honed in on both from a financial analyst community as well as maybe some other CEOs, CFOs, he thinks are not the right focus. So free cash flow is something that can be invested and spent on. 8 is surround yourself with superstars. So set the bar high when hiring. And Steve Jobs also says this. So he said that recruiting the top people was one of the most important tasks of a CEO. And 3 questions that Jeff says to ask in terms of hiring people is, will you admire this person? Will this person raise the level of average effectiveness of this job? And finally, along which dimension will this person be a superstar? 9, writing as a thinking tool. And so one other distinct thing within the culture and business practice of Amazon that is this idea of 6-page memos. So outlining the idea of PowerPoint and slides used in meetings, and rather having people articulate their ideas through a memo instills a writing culture. And what Jeff says as communication is a sign of dysfunction. And so this decentralization and independent decision making, and this idea of people reading a memo to start a meeting and then everyone discussing it after they've read it, and a memo that's, not just written right before the meeting or anything. These types of memos go through several iterations that are really refined to succinctly summarize a key thing that needs a recommendation or discussion. So another interesting one there. And then finally, this last core idea is what Jeff talks about as being, it's always day one. And so experiment patiently, accept failures, plant seeds, protect saplings, double down when you see customer delight. And so between those core ideas and the leadership principles, as well as those other qualities that were outlined before that, and those parallels that were drawn to other leaders, I think you get a great idea of his leadership style and how he exemplified that within the Amazon business. We also are going to look at those failures that I mentioned. And this comes in the way, I think, of a few different products, I would say, in terms of the size of them and the direction that the company wanted to go, but ultimately maybe the market didn't. And so the first one maybe being the Fire Phone. So in 2014, they released that, which was a smartphone that was supposed to revolutionize the way people interact with their devices. It definitely was just a commercial failure, and they discontinued it after just 2 years. So the early stages, I would say AWS as overall is a huge success from a business case standpoint. But I think the early days, it was plagued by reliability issues, and it took some time for the platform to gain traction. So maybe it could have been bigger if it were executed better from the get go. But that is still a huge business for Amazon. So I wouldn't necessarily consider that a failure per se, but maybe some early beginning difficulties there. Amazon Fresh. So in 2007, they launched that, which is a grocery delivery service. It may have been a success in some markets, but it struggled to gain traction in others. And later on in 2017, Amazon announced that it was pulling out of this business in certain markets. So, they later on acquired Whole Foods and got in the grocery business that way, but their own endeavors with that may have been presented challenges. And final one here, maybe from a product standpoint, would be the first Amazon Go store, which is a cashierless convenience store. While it's been a success, there's been some privacy concerns and some things along that route. So ultimately a few different products, but mostly a huge success from their main core products of the Amazon kind of e-commerce ecosystem, as well as AWS and some of their other offshoot products. So not too much to poke from a failure standpoint, but definitely some things where they invested decent chunks of money into that didn't get the return that they were expecting. And that is something that I think Jeff probably, if they weren't failing, they probably weren't thinking big enough and experimenting enough. So seeing some of those may have validated that they were thinking big and really trying to capitalize as much as they could. Finally, here we will go into the last section of mentors and heroes. And so a few mentors for Jeff that he mentions are first Peter Thiel. So he's a venture capitalist, and he was one of the founders of PayPal and Palantir, business strategy investing. Warren Buffett is mentioned here as well, and so obviously great success at Berkshire, and Bezos has said that he admires his long-term thinking and his ability to identify great businesses. Bill Campbell was a venture capitalist and a well-known coach to many successful entrepreneurs, including Jeff, but then also Steve Jobs, Larry Page, Eric Schmidt of Google. And so Bill Campbell was a mentor to Jeff for many years, and he helped him develop some of those leadership skills that you see. And then from a hero standpoint too, Jeff mentions Thomas Edison. So Thomas Edison, obviously a big inventor, entrepreneur. Bezos has said that he admires his creativity and his ability to turn ideas into reality. In addition to that, Walt Disney, he admires Disney's imagination and his ability to create worlds that people want to be a part of. Steve Jobs, we mentioned earlier, and Jeff particularly admires his vision and his ability to take risks. Along a similar vein, Elon Musk, Jeff said he admires his ambition and, again, his ability to think big. And then finally, Richard Branson, and he said that he admires his entrepreneurial spirit and his ability to have fun. Finally, one thing that I think is unique from the author Brad Stone's standpoint, who wrote a few books on Amazon and Jeff, is that Brad was able to summarize a few other books that Jeff read on leadership that heavily influenced his leadership style, one of which we've already mentioned the name Sam Walton. And so Sam Walton's autobiography, of which I'm sure we'll cover Sam in a future episode, just with his well-known success and legacy from a leadership standpoint with Walmart. But that is a book on leadership that Jeff has read In addition to that, I'll just list out a few more of these, which is interesting just to look at where he provides, where he gets rather this influence from. So that being The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro, a 2 by Jim Collins here, Built to Last and Good to Great, Creation, Life and How to Make It, Steve Grand, The Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton Christensen, Lean Thinking, Banish Waste and Create Wealth in Your Corporation by James Womack and Daniel Jones, Memos from the Chairman by Alan Greenberg, The Mythical Man Month, The Goal, A Process of Ongoing Improvements, Data-Driven Marketing by Mark Jeffrey, and finally, The Black Swan by Nassim Taleb. So you definitely see, and just from me reading a few of those, a few different of ideas and principles that were instilled within those books that Jeff was able to really see and exemplify within his own leadership principles and style. And I think you see that within a lot of what Jeff did here. So he did, yes, create a lot of new things and Amazon himself, but a lot of this too is just really borrowing and frankly like stealing good ideas from other people who have done it before him. So studying the best business leaders, studying the best leaders is something that not only I'm doing right now, but a lot of these leaders were doing when they were trying to build out their companies and build out their leadership legacy. So just, you learn from the best by reading the best and observing, talking to, being a mentor and hero to some of these other people too. There's a lot of just, again, dots connecting these people for which you find a lot of the same success as well as a lot of the same leadership principles and styles that get them there in many different ways as well too, as we see. But just interesting to look at the literature, the books that have the influence on these people and listen to them mention these people and their influence in interviews and things like that. That it's always a well interconnected cycle of a lot of these highly successful business people. And so that is where we'll leave the episode 7 on Jeff Bezos. Jeff, has a very well-renowned leadership style, obviously exemplified by those 14 leadership principles that we set out from an Amazon sense. But the execution, the conviction, the ability to articulate and execute just a vision over such a long period of time within Amazon, and the ability to kind of iterate and improve the Amazon model over time and scale it is definitely something that couldn't be ignored here. Yeah, he's obviously very well covered, but it would be remiss of me of not including him into this leadership series. And that is why we covered Jeff Bezos of Amazon fame here in episode 7. So hope you enjoyed it, and we'll be back with episode 8 here soon. Thanks.